What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And this one I want to break down what's happening with the overall markets. And we talk about what's happening with Nvidia, Tesla, SPY, and what happened with earnings, what you should be watching for going into tomorrow, and how things are looking, in my personal opinion, for the broader markets. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Mumu link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed 15 in total, not to mention an 8.1% APY on invested cash. The offer ends very soon, in just about 10 days from now. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with the market. So looking at Nvidia, we had pretty good earnings. They beat on EPS and revenue. They had good guidance, very, very nice growth, and they were giving us lots of promising thoughts about how things are going to be looking for the future with AI, not to mention the fact that things are looking very, very good, at least for their demand and such. So very, very nice earnings from Nvidia, in my personal opinion. However, their guidance could have been even stronger. It did beat expectations, but it could have been stronger to really help the share price push. Besides that, I still think that there is a risk of Nvidia dipping a little bit lower. It is possible to get a small dip, but it's going to most likely be very minor. And I think that Nvidia will be making a nice bounce, and we should be completely fine, at least later on. The market could also dip just a little bit thanks to Nvidia's earnings, get a small little dip here and there. But I see that as another liquidity grab because the market is going to be launching even higher later on. So let's talk about these earnings. Then I'll break down the charts in a lot more detail. What happened with Nvidia? Nvidia had some very, very strong earnings. You guys can see how the growth has been looking when it comes to their quarterly sales. There's been very, very strong growth over the last couple of years, especially this year in itself. So for this quarter, we got this much revenue. This is what guidance is looking like. When you account for guidance and what we're expecting for the fourth quarter, I think that things are still looking very, very strong for them, and the growth is going to still be there. When it comes to what they announced, for their earnings, we got about 81 cents per share. That's the adjusted earnings or adjusted EPS. That is above the expectation of 75 cents, so not bad whatsoever. Revenue is at $35.1 billion, which is above the expectation of $33.2 billion. And their outlook was also above estimations, but only slightly. So we got basically around revenue with a midpoint forecast of about $37.5 billion. So that's what we're expecting. That is above the consensus of $37.1 billion. So it's very close to expectations. And I think that's what the issue was for Nvidia. So basically what happened was we had good growth, good earnings. We beat on pretty much everything. But the issue was the fact that our expectations for Q4 were very close to what we were expecting, a little bit above that. Now, it wasn't a big beat on what we're expecting, right? We should have seen like 38 billion, 40 billion, something much higher than what we're expecting. That would have helped the share price explode. Because it was very close to expectations, only slightly above, it wasn't really enough to get investors very excited to see the share price explode. So that's the reason why it kind of like dipped a little bit. It dropped about almost 4%, then it got bought back up because for the most part, everything was quite good besides that one metric. Once again, like I said, their overall forecast is at about $37.5 billion in revenue. That's going to conclude the fiscal 2024. And then that's going to start off, not to mention what's going on with the growth as well. And then that's pretty good. Not bad whatsoever. But the issue is, like I said before, that we were expecting them to have a much bigger beat. When it comes to other things out there, the automotive revenue in terms of the chips sold to those companies was at about $449 million, which is not bad. That's an increase of about 17% year over year. Gaming revenue is up about 15% year over year to $3.3 billion, and their adjusted gross margins are at about 75% for the quarter. That's a lot in line with expectations, generating about $16.79 billion in free cash flow during the period. Once again, very, very bullish news. We also heard them announce that the age of AI is in full steam, propelling the global shift to AI and Nvidia computing, according to Jensen Huang, who is the CEO and founder of Nvidia. On top of this, they're talking about how AI is transforming every industry, company, and country, and they're once again trying to adopt them to revolutionize workflows, all different types of things, such as the industries in robotics, and then also computing, the list goes on. That's very, very bullish. Now, they also address the Blackwell claims that are being made about how they were overheating, they had issues here and there. Instead of saying that, they actually told us that, if anything, there is high demand for Blackwell, exceeding supply for several quarters in the fiscal 2026, and it's going to continue to ship both Hopper and Blackwell shipments in the coming fourth quarter. They did say that there could be some supply constraints, but for the most part, they're still going to continue to meet demand. So that's very, very big news, especially because of the fact that the headlines were coming out saying that there was an issue with them overheating. This could lead to even bigger constraints and issues here and there. But Nvidia has not confirmed that. If anything, they're saying that the demand remains strong. They're going to continue with their shipments. Guidance also is looking pretty good. We're looking at some nice growth. The year-over-year growth is decelerating just a little bit because of the fact that, the higher you go, the harder it is to get that massive, massive growth. So, for example, if your sales are at like $5 billion, right? If you go from 5 billion to 10 billion, that's not as crazy. Or it's very, very insane to see that, right? That's like doubling your growth. But then to maintain that percentage gain, if your revenues are already in like the 30 billions, you need to get to like 60 billion to double again to keep up that rate. So of course the rate is not going to be sustainable. They're going to be going from like 32 to 35 to 37 billion revenue, then 40 billion. So it's going to start slowly growing by a few billion every quarter. At least that's the projection that we're at, and we're not just doubling every single quarter like we were earlier. So that's the thing you have to remember about Nvidia. When you get higher percentages in this revenue, it's not going to be showing the same year-over-year growth, the same growth that you've seen from before. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's completely normal, and it's something that Nvidia is kind of like accounting for, because you have to be very, very realistic when it comes to demand and factors like that. Besides that, they're also going to be paying a quarterly dividend of about 1 cent per share to shareholders on December 27th. Not bad whatsoever. And I just wanted to say, for the most part, earnings were quite good. So very, very good job by Nvidia and their team. Very, very strong growth in my personal opinion. Maybe their guidance could have been a little bit stronger to get the share price up, but that's okay, guys. It still is aligned with the expectations, a little bit above them, if anything. And I'm still very proud of the progress that they have been making. And once again, you guys can see that this is making a lot of headlines. They're saying that the stock dips as guidance beats, but perhaps not by enough. And I do agree with that. That is a very, very truthful headline. Yes, they did great, nice beats here and there, but was it enough to really impress investors? Not entirely, right? That's why the share price is down a little bit. This is the earnings that have come out. We also had NIO and Target announce their earnings. I did go over Target in more detail earlier, but just to clarify, Target did not do too well with earnings. They actually missed on EPS with $1.85. Revenue is only at 25.67 billion below expectations, and their overall forecasts are not as strong as what we initially anticipated because of this shift in their sales. So that's why we ended up seeing one of the biggest earnings misses in about 2 years with a cut in their forecast, which is why the share price is down. For economic data tomorrow, which is going to be Thursday, November 21st, 2024, please note that before the market opens, we have initial jobless claims coming out, some data from the Philly Fed, and for the most part, very minor data. Then we have some bill auctions, and that's pretty much it. Nothing too crazy for Thursday. Also know that right now the market is quite neutral. We're in the middle. Momentum is more in favor of greed as we're seeing buyers stepping in defending the S&P 500. The put to call option ratio is slowing down. We are seeing a little bit more fear, though. The rate at which this is growing is slowing, but there is fear building as we're seeing more puts being bought, and we'll see if that leads to a squeeze or not. The VIX is also kind of flat. It's trying to push a little bit higher for its 50 EMA, so we'll see how things end up going. With that being said, guys, what do I see for the markets? What is my prediction? Let's talk about how I think this is going to go. We're going to start off with the notorious Nvidia stock. So Nvidia, in my opinion, I just want to call out the daily time frame. Looking at the daily, there is this gap down here around this 140 area. I'm not sure we go all the way down there. I think we might be retesting 142, and we'll have to see if 142 holds. If not, 140 is going to be tested. But I presume somewhere in that range we will get bought back up. I think that Nvidia might dip to 142.29, if not 140 if that fails us, and then we should be bouncing after that. With Nvidia potentially dipping just a little bit more, that could cause the market to slow down just a bit. But then I think buyers will return and try to push the share price right back up to where we currently are, or even higher than where we ended up closing at. So that's what I think is the most likely possibility. Because remember, Nvidia will most likely gap down. So we're going to be forming another gap right here. We might come down to fill these first gaps, or at least test our 20 EMA before we start pushing to fill the next gap above. That's most likely what Nvidia is going to be doing. A gap down, a dip, and a bounce is most likely what is going to be coming. Because once again, earnings were not bad, guys. They had good earnings overall. Just their guidance was a little bit, it was basically a little bit lackluster in the eyes of some investors. We expect them to beat by a few billion, not just like be, 0.4 billion above expectations. We want something a little bit higher. For SPY, now this is bullish. This looks very bullish, technically speaking. Could this be a trap? We'll have to see about this, but I'm just trying to say this looks bullish on the daily. So what could happen is, because we formed a wick here, I wouldn't be surprised if we actually gap down a bit and see a little bit of a dip. There might be a small dip coming because of Nvidia's earnings. But Nvidia is not dumping that much. It's not like it's down 10% or 5%. It's just a tiny little drop, which is not affecting the market as much. So what I think is going to happen is there might be a small dip initially to the low 590, if not 588 area. And then we could attempt to get a nice bounce and start pushing to break past 590. If 590 breaks, we're looking for a push all the way up towards 593 to fill that gap. I think that's most likely what we're going to end up doing as long as we don't lose 585. Look for a small dip, potentially a bounce. And if we break out past 590 as the day goes on, we're going to try to push to fill that gap. I also want to call out a very, very interesting trend on SPY. So if you look at, if you go to like the 30 minutes time frame, I'm going to do it this way. We have an interesting trend how, if you guys look at the last couple of days, right? Last Friday, SPY dipped a bit, then started to rebound just a little bit. We gap up, push up and trade flat. And then look at the last 2 days, we kind of like dipped and bounced, then we dipped and bounced. We might see a dip before we bounce again and try to go higher. And I think that's the most likely case. This also resembles a slanted inverse head and shoulders, so it might see a little dip and a bounce as the most likely possibility. So I anticipate that's what SPY is going to most likely be doing. So for tomorrow, I think that SPY might dip a little bit in the morning, retest 588 or so. Maybe it could go lower. We'll have to see about that. But then I think the same thing will happen where we get bought back up and we start pushing to fill some of these gaps into like the mid 590s. I think that's what SPY is going to most likely do. Bitcoin is also looking very, very strong on the 4-hour time frame. We could be on our way back down towards 93,500 before we try to bounce and start pushing up for 96,000. Bitcoin is bullish, but look for a small dip initially before it starts to break out. For the triple Q, I know a lot of people are talking about the QQQ. We're very flat right now, so Nvidia is not affecting it as much. It is possible to get a small dip because of Nvidia, and we could retest 501. It's possible we dip down towards that area, but then we should bounce. If we manage to break past 503.5 or so, we're going to be looking for a push for 505 and eventually 508. If we lose 500 flat, we're looking for essentially 496. And if 495 fails us, we have a gap to fill at 492. I don't think we're going to most likely fill that gap to 492 first. I think we're more likely to fill the upper gap first. Might be a small dip to about 501 for a liquidity grab. And then this thing might start pushing back up to fill these gaps. So I think 501 is going to be tested and 505 is going to be retested. If we break that, we're looking for that gap fill for 508. Most likely we dip and bounce on the triple Q because the 4-hour is holding it very nicely and the daily has that gap to fill. For NQ, the same thing is basically going on. Now, I just want to call out that NQ, just like ES, is essentially just range bound. So we're trading sideways right now between our EMAs, going back and forth and back and forth. Might come down a little bit, could retest the 20,680 area before it tries to bounce. We're looking for 20,800 as our resistance. If that breaks, we're looking for a bigger push back up for almost 21,000. So I think we're going to get a breakout on NQ, but we may get an initial sell-off after Nvidia's earnings before it continues to push higher. That's the most likely case I'm going to be looking at. For ES, and I'll talk about Tesla after, ES is looking more bullish, actually. At least technically speaking, it's getting bought back up. We're making higher lows here, and this also sort of resembles like an inverse head and shoulders. So it could dip a little bit towards like the lower 59,000 or 5,900 area, before it tries to break out. And if we break this high here at 5,950, we're looking for an attempt to get close to about 5,980, then eventually 6,000. I think that we're forming a very, very strong base right here. So we might dip a little bit towards the lower 5,900 area. Then we could start pushing all the way up to 5,980, then eventually that's 6,000 area as the most likely possibilities. Look for a dip and a bounce as the most likely cases, and we'll see what happens after that. For other factors out there, we have Tesla. Tesla's once again looking more bullish as we're holding our key supports. But I do see a problem because of the way Nvidia is trading. We might see Tesla continue to trade sideways between 335 and 348. I think we might dip a bit and start to push back up to this imbalance for 345 tomorrow. Then we trade sideways, most likely in the range, unless we break 350, which I think Tesla will eventually do, but I'm not sure about tomorrow specifically. Eventually, we should break 350 to start pushing up to this next imbalance, taking us up to 362.5, then 365. But we'll have to see if we get that break. So I presume we're just going to be trading sideways on Tesla for now. We might dip a bit and start pushing higher for 346 to fill that imbalance before we continue to consolidate. And then later on, it is possible Tesla gets a breakout later to fill that imbalance. I will turn more bearish, though, if we end up losing 330 flat. Then we could be filling this gap down to 321, but that's looking a little bit less likely looking at the inverse head and shoulder setup and the fact that Tesla's riding its 20 EMA very nicely. So once again, a little dip and a bounce to fill that imbalance, and eventually a breakout higher is most likely what's coming. For Apple, Apple is, especially on the 4-hour time frame, is looking bullish as we're holding our key support. We might dip lower towards that 227 area before it tries to bounce, so we'll have to see how it goes from there. Look for a dip back down, a small dip to about 227 before it tries to bounce again. But overall, I think Apple will continue to uptrend because once again, we're holding this yellow trend line of support. Look for a dip to 227, then a bounce. That's the most likely case. Neo had an interesting day. It basically dipped and then it got bought back up after earnings. Earnings were not that great. We kind of missed on revenue and EPS. The losses were a little bit wider than expected, but their guidance for deliveries is very strong. It might dip to about 4.5 and try to bounce back up, but I think it's just trading sideways for now. Netflix remains very strong and bullish. All the news involving their next Netflix live stream event is still very hyped, and we could be looking for an attempt to push higher. Might grab liquidity in the morning to retest the 880 area before it tries to break out for that 890 target, so I'm going to be watching that as well. MSTR looks bullish. As long as we don't lose these supports, I think the 30 minutes is going to be very important. We're trying to hold the support here. We'll have to see if 469 holds. If it doesn't hold, we're looking for an attempt to get back down towards 454. If we hold 469 to 470, I think we continue to pump higher. So look for a little bit of a dip and we'll see if we bounce off that support. As long as we get back above 500, I turn more bullish. Otherwise, we're range bound right now like we were today between 500 and about the 470 area. So 470 to 500 is going to be our range, but we could break out higher if we break 500. There's still potential in this. We'll have to give it some time to develop. For Celsius or CELH, I just want to call out that on the 4-hour time frame, we're nearing our 50 EMA. We could be dipping closer to about this 27.5 area before it tries to break out. If 27.9 breaks, we're looking for a bigger push to much higher levels. Might see a dip and a bounce as the most likely possibilities. For Supermicro, because of the fact that Nvidia is dipping a bit, this could see a small dip to retest 23.5 to 24 before it tries to break out. I still think that this has potential to bounce off this bullish divergence. Might get a small dip before it tries to bounce back up to 30. So look for a test of about 25 to 23.8 in that area before it tries to bounce again for that 30 target. It still looks more bullish to me. Unfortunately for Palantir, guys, this is looking a little bit weaker. We could be forming like a head and shoulders like structure. For now, don't worry about it. Just look at the range right here because we're getting bought back up around 59-ish, around the 59 area, and we tend to reject very close to about 63. So we're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. We could be tipping back down to 59 before we try to bounce back up to about 63, and I just think we continue to trade sideways as the most likely possibility. For Rivian has a head and shoulders like structure. If we break 10.4, we're looking for essentially a pushback up to 10.68. If we reject here, we're looking for a dip back down below 10, taking us all the way down to about 9.5. It is possible that we kind of reject here and make a higher low here. So we had this low at 10.5, at 9.58, excuse me. And then we could be coming back down for about the 9.5 area before it tries to rebound. I see a small dip coming before it tries to bounce, but otherwise it's just trading sideways within a range. SoFi remains more bullish. SoFi could grab liquidity again to retest the 4.5 area before it tries to bounce, but I think we're on our way for that 15 target. We look a little bit more bullish. The IWM looks more bullish. As long as we get back above 231, I favor upside for 232.5. If we lose and reject here, we're going to be looking for 228. Might see a small dip before it tries to break out for that 232.5 target as it looks more bullish. For AMD, we're range bound. We're trying to get bought back up around this 135 area, and we tend to reject very close to about 140, going back and forth, back and forth. Now, at the same time, this could be forming like a double bottom. So, with AMD potentially dipping a little bit lower, which I think it's going to do, this could still dip and then bounce and make its way back up for about 139. I think it's going to be range bound for now, but look for a dip and a bounce. As long as we get back above 139, I could see a bounce. I think it dips first closer to 135 before it tries to bounce, so just keep that in mind. ARM is also holding up very, very nicely. It might dip a little bit back down to about 130 or a little bit lower before it tries to bounce again. But I do see it ultimately going up to 136.9 or higher. So it might be a dip and a bounce again. So watch for that. Coin is looking more bullish thanks to Bitcoin. We're going to have to see if we hold 311. As long as we hold that, we could try to break out to test these highs again. If 311 fails us, we're looking for 300 flat. I think that this inverse head and shoulders could pan out and push us back up for that 340 target. Amazon's range bound right here. We'll see if we break 204. If that breaks, we're looking for a bigger push back up for 210. If this rejects here, we're looking for a dip back down for 199. So now we're just range bound. I think Amazon will just continue to shuffle between 200 and 204 for the time being before it tries to break out higher. For Meta, we're trying to break out higher as well. We have this imbalance up here to fill around 573. If we lose 564, we could be dipping lower. As long as we hold this, we're looking for 570. If that breaks, we're looking for 574 as well. So I think that Meta will most likely push on the 4-hour time frame towards the 570 area, not to mention 574. I think there's more upside potential for the 570 zone. For Microsoft, we're trading sideways within a range between 414 and also this 417 area. With this liquidity grab right here, it's possible it gets a small dip back down to 414. But I think that this is where we're trying to base this 414 area. Might come down before it tries to rebound for 417. Looks pretty sideways, not really doing much. Google's also holding up very nicely. I did call out the fact that we have this like support that's building. As long as we don't lose 175, I think this favors maybe a little bit of a dip and a bounce into a slow uptrend to fill this imbalance. Back up to 180 is going to likely go. So I'll be watching to see if that ends up being the case. GameStop could be on its way to 30 as long as we don't lose 27.21. I think we do favor a push up. AMC could be on its way to about 4.5. DJT is very flat right now. It's stuck between 29 and about 31 as our support. So I think we're just range bound between 29 and 30, going back and forth for now. We may attempt to try to break 30, so give it some time, but otherwise we just remain in that range. Now, the VIX has been pushing to fill this gap up here. Will the VIX push a little bit higher before it rejects, or will the VIX get a rejection? With Nvidia dipping a little bit, it is possible this does go a little higher, just a little bit as the market dips, but it might not fully fill the gap. I'm not 100% sure about that because we are struggling to hold above our 200 EMA. So if we break past 18 and hold above it, I do think we might fill the gap, and then that could slow the market down just somewhat before the market tries to bounce. But because of the fact that SPY and the S&P 500 looks more bullish to me, I'm starting to think that this is a fake out and the VIX is not going to do a good job at breaking out. So I think the VIX kind of pops and it might start rejecting. It might actually do the opposite. It might not fully fill this gap. It might actually come down instead. And the market may actually dip a little bit, then start pushing later on because I still think we look bullish on the charts. The 10 years looking more bullish. This could be kind of flat. The dollar looks a little bit more bearish. This might be dipping back down to about 106.5. So we're still kind of stuck. So my view of the market is very simple. I presume that the most likely possibility is that we continue to trade sideways. We're looking for a small dip on SPY, guys. So be expecting a small dip because of the fact that Nvidia is a little bit in the red. And SPY could be grabbing some liquidity. But then even if we do get a small dip, I don't think the move will last forever. I think we will get bought back up and start squeezing to higher levels as we have a gap to fill in other factors like that. So expect a gap down tomorrow, a little bit of a dip, a small dip on SPY. We'll see if we hold 587 to 588, that area. If we hold that, we could try to bounce and push higher. If not, we might dip a little bit more before we get the bounce. Look for a dip, and then we'll see if we get that bounce. That's most likely what I'm going to be looking for because of the way Nvidia ended up, trading after earnings. But it's okay, guys. Nvidia will be fine. The market will get a big run later on. I'm still very bullish for the month of December, which is just less than 2 weeks away. And we're going to be looking for some interesting volatility. I thank you all so much for listening. Have a great day. Have a great evening wherever you guys are around the world or night. And I'll see you guys very soon before the market opens. Thank you for listening and peace out.